and Lee was afraid he might be late as well, so I just wanted to be sure we had a quorum to start the meeting at 3, which we do.
How about Rich? Is he coming?
I have not heard to the contrary, but sometimes he is late as well. But we do have a quorum, so I think we will get started.
I don't think so.
I am calling this meeting, January 9th of the Budget, Capital, and Personnel Committee to order. We have a quorum with Mr. Shurtleff, Mr. Lane, and myself present, and we have at least one other member who's running a bit late. Meanwhile, though, I think we can approve the minutes. If somebody would move them. Thank you, Lee. Mike, would you like to second?
I suppose you want a second.
I do want a second, please.
If we want to discuss them. Second.
Okay. Does anybody want to discuss the minutes? If not, are we ready to vote? All in favor, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Thank you. Now, it looks like we have a couple of things to add to the agenda. Things that were on our desks. I find a resolution number 11411, appropriation from contingent funds for RP 467, and budget adjustments and transfers information sheet, budget adjustments, finance 2022 year end. So those will be added to the agenda. Brittany, do we need to vote on this additional resolution, or can we just add it?
You can just add it. It's okay with me.
Is it all right with everybody?
Yeah, by me.
Okay, then consider it added. And we'll take those before we get to our discussion of committee goals. Do we have any comments from the public? Doesn't look like it. The public doesn't love this committee. I guess I should not complain about that. All right then, Lisa, we're up to County Administrator's report, so please take it away.
We have some resolutions to consider, but I'll give you a brief update. Last week, we posted for the opening for the Chief Equity Diversity Officer position. So that is up on the HR website, and we're in the recruitment period at this point for that important role. We are at the close of the search for Deputy County Administrator, and very close to being able to announce that selection. There are a number of other searches of department heads and higher level positions that both I'm involved in, as well as the human resources. So we are lining up and staggering all of the high-level searches at the beginning of the year. So homeless services coordinator position will be in the lineup later on this month or the next month, as soon as we can. We have an RFP for grant writing services, which is also finalized and in the purchasing department for review and for legal review. So that will be going out as soon as we get through all of the necessary review and approval processes. So we're off to a busy start for 2023.
Thank you, Lisa. Does anybody have any questions for Lisa? And I'm glad that Mr. John and Mr. Mezey have joined us. I gather the school buses are very slow.
I apologize to my colleagues for being tardy.
But your feet were slow. How's that?
Buffalo Hill was steep in the wrong direction.
Okay. Well, better late than never. We're glad you're here. Okay. So I guess we can move on to admin's resolutions. All right, we have an appropriation from contingency fund, additional funding for community recovery grant program administration, ID 11345. Would somebody like to move that? Rich John, thank you. A second, please, from someone. Thank you, Mike Lane. Any discussion on this or explanation, Lisa?
I gather from MRB, this is what we hope to be, they hope to be the final modification to support the increased number of inquiries and work necessary for the program.
Okay, it seems like an optimistically small number for the number of grants we're giving out, but any other comments or questions? Are we ready to vote? All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Next resolution, authorizing 2022 capital improvement and workforce development pilot program payments for Tompkins Cortland Community College operating budget ID 11377. Can I get a motion on that, please? Rich, thank you. And Mike seconds. And now, as I recall, these are funding initiatives that we already approved last year, so this is just the approval of the actual disbursement of funds.
That's correct. This is the action that makes sure that they get appropriated to TC3 and not swept into our fund balance at the end of 2022.
Okay, and these were things that were actually budgeted for. It's not coming out of contingent funds.
That's correct.
Okay, any questions? Rich?
So if we didn't pass this and they didn't come and ask for the money in time, it would just go away. So this is essentially setting up as a reserve for them.
It is getting the money to them because they did not draw it down in the course of 2022, and yet they are going to be using these funds toward these.
Okay. Thank you.
I trust you're not suggesting that as a strategy, Rich.
What?
I trust you weren't suggesting that as a strategy of not approving the resolution.
Oh, no, I just.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So if there are no other questions, are we ready to vote? All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, Resolution C, budget adjustment for mental health staff retention funding distribution, ID 11388. Can I get a motion on this, please? Rich moves, Greg seconds. Thank you both. Do you want to talk to this, Lisa?
Sure, and just a reminder, and for the public record, that these are funds that came down from the State Office of Mental Health to specific titles in the mental health department for recruitment and retention. So there is really no county discretion as to who these bonuses could go to. It was either we accept the funds and distribute them to the titles per OMH, or we don't accept the funds. And we chose to accept those funds. And these are the titles to whom they go.
Rich, you have a question?
Yeah, no, I don't have a question. I had a potential proposals for amendments in line 3, and this is to the point that I would like the public to understand. This is New York State driven. That in line 3 we say staff retention funding per the New York State Office of Mental Health. And then in line 9, amend to say were received from New York State in the amount of.
From New York State, okay. Is that friendly to the mover and seconder? Okay, does anybody have any objection? All right, so that will become part of the resolution. Lee?
Just a question. Revenue is only showing 18,000. Is that just an adjustment to get it balanced with what went into the revenues in 2022?
Yeah, because it doesn't match the total of the expenses that are listed, which are considerably in excess of $18,080.
They look
Good
like,
catch, Lee.
Yeah, they look like they add up to the 48 plus 32. So.
Yes, I can try to to get the details on the technicalities of the resolution and let you know, because I can't speak to that off the top of my head.
Well, I guess,
Received anything?
Also, up
Funds.
in 9, it also talks about the 32,000.
right.
Doesn't seem to add up to either 48 or 32. Maybe it's the 48. I don't think so, though.
I mean, it could be that there's money left over that we got last year that we haven't distributed. How does the committee wish to proceed? We could have a quickie meeting before the ledge meeting when we've had a chance to get this straightened out, or we could pass this on the understanding that Lisa will reconcile these numbers before the legislature meeting. How do you all want to proceed?
Passed it with the proviso that we'll have an explanation.
I agree.
Okay, so we will pass this, Lisa, but you're on the hook for sorting out the numbers. Okay, great. Thanks, Lee. That's a good catch. Does anybody else have anything? Seeing none, are we ready to vote? All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, next, resolution authorizing a contract with Tompkins County Soil and Water Conservation District to provide interim financial assistance to support and conduct conservation-related activities, ID 11405. I'll take a, thank you, Mike, for the motion. Can I get a second, please? Thank you, Lee. I can speak to this one from years of being on the Soil and Water Board. They've got grant money coming in, grant money going out, and a lot of the grant funds coming in don't necessarily come in until after the money's been expended. So we lend them a couple $100,000 every year, which they pay back every year, and then we lend them another couple $100,000 every year, so that they've got the cash to make sure that this grant funding thing flows smoothly. Does anybody have any questions about that one?
Do we get interest?
No, we don't. Mike?
I was just going to say, we've had to do this for the college and other people. We help them with their cash flow.
Yeah, it's a pretty routine thing, so. And they always pay us back, which is nice. Okay. So, any other questions? Are we ready to vote? All in favor? Thank you. Okay, Resolution E, Budget Adjustment, County Administration, ARPA D Fund, and CL Fund. And I have to admit, these resolutions just left me completely in the dark because it looked like we were just moving money around, and the names of the funds sometimes stayed the same. It was just the numbers that changed. So does anybody have, let's see, did we move this? I can't remember. Rich moves, Greg seconds. So if you can shed any light on, I get the idea of what this does. I just don't understand how it actually works.
So, and Drew is here, can also speak to it, but this first resolution that I believe was just passed, the D Fund and the CL Fund, these are, and both resolutions are to align how we account for ARPA per updated Treasury guidelines. The current one that we are looking at is making sure that we realize and appropriate the funding for our highway department and recycling and materials management, both of whom have capital projects that we are utilizing ARPA funds for. So that's what this particular resolution is for.
So this is just accounting entries, basically. It doesn't really move money anywhere.
That's right.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. Rich, do you have a question?
In line 6, I'd remove the word "in."
Okay. I think that's plain error, is that what they call it? Okay, thank you. So all in favor? That's unanimous, thank you. And then we have something similar, Resolution F, Budget Adjustment County Administration, ARPA ID 11394. Can I get a motion on that one? Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Rich, for the second. And I assume this is just more of the same, Lisa.
It's more of the same, and this one implicates the general fund, that we have to realize the ARPA revenues first in the general fund, and then, I believe, disperse them to the other funds where they're going to be expended.
Okay. Any questions? Rich?
Sorry for being full of questions today. Where would I go to see the naming nomenclature for the different funds, D, CL, DM, CDA?
Asking myself that same question today, and I was looking in our budget book. I don't know that it's laid out in our budget book.
You know, that might be, I don't think our budget book is big enough, for one, but maybe a page just with brief definitions or explanations of the funds, that would be a nice thing to have, because, yeah, even when I understand, oh, this is highway, I forget.
5 years ago, when my little cadre of legislators came on board, we met with Rick, and he gave us a list of all these funds. And it goes on forever, and it's hugely unenlightening. But if you really want to, be cruel to yourself, sure.
Maybe the top 10, you know, just.
Greatest hits.
Greatest hits, yeah.
Greg, did you have a question?
No, I think that would be very helpful as well, so thanks
Okay.
for bringing that up.
Oh, well, that's something.
Sure Norma has one ready to go. She's probably drafting the email now.
Norma's on vacation, a well-deserved vacation.
She still might be drafting the email.
All right. Okay, are we ready to vote on this one? All in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Hey, and now we have the Director of Finance report from Drew.
Thank you. A few things I will touch on, actually 4 I'll touch on. I promised at our last meeting I'd bring you our investment update. We have $25 million invested in New York class currently. That's unchanged from last month. The current rate at New York class is 4.34%. We have used that rate to negotiate with some of the local banks that we have funds in as well, and we've seen some rate increases there. Just to give you some comparison, we're at 4.34%. 6 months Treasury as of Friday was 4.7, so we're pretty close to that. And actually that 6 months Treasury, it's been trending this way for the last year, but it's a strange trend. That's above the 12-month and the 24-month Treasury rate. Those are both at 4.5 and 4.1. So the 6 month at 4.7, a year at 4.5, and 24 2 year at 4.1, and we're at 4.3. So we're right in that mix. One of the other investment options is New York Max for us, and they're at 4.1 currently. So I think we're doing fairly well with that. Any questions on investment? I do have 3 other items, but.
What were you kind of figuring on? Is there a budgetary amount, interest, or?
We haven't, because it really fluctuates based on the amount we have available to invest and the interest rates. And the interest rates have been so hard to predict lately that it is difficult. Also, we'll look at this about every month. We look at the balances to be sure we're within the investment policy, and also what funds we may have coming in. So come March, we're going to see a lot of property tax money coming to us from the towns, and also we'll start collecting April 1st. So we may be able to put some more in there, and then towards the end of the year, we'll probably have to draw back out.
So I know that there's something unusual and significant about the fact that the short-term interest rates are higher than the long-term interest rates, but but I can never remember what that is. Do you mind reminding me?
There's a few, and I think if you talk to 5 economists or accountants, they'll give you 10 opinions on it. But the general consensus is it creates a very unsure fiscal environment when you have that people don't feel comfortable going out more than 6 months. They don't know what the market's going to bring us 8, 10, 12 months out. So that's just really a confirmation that there's a lot of uncertainty in the markets and people aren't committing to anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's easier to remember than whether I should be expecting a recession or not. Okay, great.
Some will say that, I think, but I think the general consensus is it's unsure, and that unsure is not a positive thing, typically. The 3 other items I have are just updating you on the bonding issuance. As you're probably aware, we started the bonding process in the fall. We are looking at issuing bonds February 1st. Might change a day or two, but February 1st is our goal date. Before we issue the bonds, we get our credit rating or our credit report, which is issued by Moody's, and we have a conference call with them on Thursday to start that process. So they sent us some questions this afternoon, and we'll go there, and my goal is to keep us at the highest rating of any county in New York State. So Rick left me some good notes on that, and I think we'll continue that.
Do you have any sense what the bonding rates will be?
No sense offhand. They gave us a wide fluctuation. They said higher than the 1% we got last year, but hopefully not as high as the 6 or 7 that we've seen.
Oh, dear God, I hope not.
So my gut would be in that 4% if I had to.
And are these on bands or bonds?
We have some of both. We have some bands and we have some bonds. They're going to Fiscal Advisors in Syracuse is who we use, and they told me they're going to ramp up the marketing to try and get as many players involved, that this is the best issuance they have for a New York State government. So,
We are in demand.
yes, hopefully that'll put us in demand because, that fiscal uncertainty, we're a little bit more of a sure bet if there is such a thing, so.
It's one of the less sexy areas of county government, but our bond rating will make a huge difference in this crazy environment right now. That it sleeps a lot of the time, but this is really good where we're at. Yeah.
The other 2 items we have, just wanted to update you a little bit. I think I've talked about it, just some of the operational things, the IDA and task audits, the Tobacco Security and the Industrial Development Agency. We do the finances for both of them, and they're kicking off currently. I met with both of those groups last week to really do my introductory and get to learn those things, so we're working on those. The county audit, the interim is being worked on. Been working with Lisa and Ruby both on some processes and communications, and I think we're looking for some improvements there. And my plan is to have the sales tax that we received in December out to the full legislature next week at your meeting there. So that all being said, we have some really high workloads on staff, and we're trying to get through year end, and it is a struggle. So if you hear grumblings of, geez, it's taken a week or 2 to get this information, we're trying to be as responsive as we can, and we're trying to do that. Ruby and I talked earlier of getting the Director of Finance position posted next week or the beginning of the week after. We think that'll happen, and then looking at what we can do with our current staffing. So we're working on it.
Thanks, Drew. Does anybody have any questions for Drew? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so now, in terms of committee chair report, I don't really have a report, and I will reserve my comments for our discussion of committee goals. I don't see anyone here from WDIC, but I do not think they've had a meeting since our last meeting, so I think we're safe to just move forward. And that brings us to Ruby, Director of Human Resources Commissioner, so take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just have two brief announcements. The initial report for the compensation analysis is due at the end of this week, or in worst case scenario, next week. So I will be reporting to you with the initial report from that analysis. And the second Drew mentioned is that we will be reposting the position of Director of Finance with the help of a recruitment firm. The contract is being reviewed now so we can execute it, and hopefully things will be on track for posting next week.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Ruby? Mike?
The report, when that comes, will there be recommendations with that, or just this is the way it is?
This is the initial report. It's just a view of where we are.
Okay.
And then we will get together and decide the next steps. So there will be questions about the initial report, whether we'll have to go and review position descriptions or grades, and then we'll come. But the entire process comes with recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, we're just whipping right along. I can't take notes fast enough to keep up with y'all. Okay, so we have some
Lisa.
other. Lisa?
Before we move, I wondered if you wanted to go back to the resolution where there was a question. I think I can speak to it.
Oh,
at
hooray.
this
That's a
point
good
and
idea. Thank you,
off
Lisa.
the plate. So again, I'm looking at Doc ID 11388, budget adjustment for mental health staff retention funding distribution. The third whereas, if you look at the payments received from New York State in the amount of $48,000 and $32,240, that adds up to $80,240, and that is the amount that's the total amount dispersed down below the increased expense to the A fund. So I think the funds do reconcile.
Yeah, I guess the question is just, what's this 18,080? Where's that coming from? The revenue account fund from to 18,080.
I can't speak to, well, maybe you could, Drew?
I think this is what you were going to say, is that based on the split up of the positions, if you look at the increases to expense fund, you'll see 4311 and 4312. And I think when we passed the first resolution, those amounts weren't definitely known. So we did our best guess, and the 18.8 realigns them between the two. So it's taking it from 4312 and just putting it in 4311.
So this is just an accounting adjustment?
Yes.
Okay. Is everybody happy? Okay, good. I love it when everybody's happy. Okay. We've got a couple of other resolutions. Resolution A, I don't know where these resolutions came from.
The request for sales tax rate extension that came from the clerk's office.
Right, and then there's one delegation of authority to authorize certain tax and solid waste fee refunds under $500.
I do believe so, yes.
Okay, great. So let's deal with that first. That's ID 11382. Can I get a motion on that, please? Mike moves, Greg seconds. Thank you, gentlemen. Is there any discussion on this? Lisa, do you need to speak to this one?
I think
It's pretty routine. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, all in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, request for authorization to extend the additional 1% sales tax rate in Tompkins County, ID 11403. Can I get a motion on that? Rich moves. Mike seconds. Thank you. And this, again, looks like something we do fairly regularly because we need the money. Okay, any questions? Mike?
Always, certainly at NISAC is a question, because we don't like having to go back to the state for this. And what the fight a few years ago was, the state made it 3 years instead of 2 years. And I don't know whether they plan to do that again this time or what's going on, but perhaps our delegation, when it goes to NISAC, can investigate that.
Well, I'm on the Budget, Taxation and Budget Committee, Standing Committee, so I'll ask about that. The last time we talked about this in that committee, the consensus was that the state likes to make us come back and ask because it keeps us, trying to think of a tactful way to put this, in touch with our state delegation, and gives them something to impress us with their importance over. Yeah, I probably just blew the tack thing. Rich?
It just strikes me that voting against this would cause havoc in the towns, village, and the city. So it really isn't our decision to make on our own, I think, anyway. And I can't imagine.
Well, it'll affect everyone's budget, yeah.
Yeah, it would.
Exactly. So we're just doing this out of the goodness of our hearts, basically. Mike and then Lee and then Greg.
Just a clarification, our budgets are all respectively premised on having that 1%.
That's a good point, too. Greg, Mike, somebody?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding. This is just asking Assemblyperson Kellis and Senator Webb to sponsor and support legislation extending that authority, right? It's not, that's all this resolution
Right.
really.
We're not adding any tax, we're just not giving it up.
Yeah, that's, so it's because this currently goes through November of 2023.
Right.
So we're just asking them to do their work at the state level to make sure we can continue with this practice.
And I think for them to introduce it, they have to have a home rule request from the county.
Right. Yeah, because these are all done as home rule.
Cynically, is this so that New York State can say the taxes are 7%? That's true? Yeah. Okay.
But we're not cynical on this committee. Mike?
Years ago, the two parties were at each other's throats over this because one party would, well, let's say the Republicans were saying that the Democrats were raising taxes and they were counting all these home rule on these 1% as times that the Democrats were raising taxes. And so they got into a big fight with some of the bigger counties downstate, like Nassau and Suffolk, as I recall, and wouldn't pass these home rule resolutions. And we got real close to not having the authority. Finally, I think in December or something, they finally went through. But they play political games with this a lot. And the last couple of times it hasn't been too bad, but it could happen again.
There are still hurt feelings over that, have been expressed in the standing committee whenever this matter is discussed. Yeah, because it wreaks havoc. Okay. Are we ready to vote on this one? All in favor? Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, resolution to increase the senior elections clerk position to 40 hours. Can I get a motion on this one? Thank you, Lee, seconded by Greg. I don't see anybody here.
Lana's in there. Lana's in there.
Oh, that's right. Hi, Lana. Did you want to speak to this, please?
Well, my understanding is that the senior elections clerk on the Democratic side reduced her hours by 5 hours early COVID when they had to trim the budget. Right. But she's been working 40. It's budgeted for 40, so they're just trying to.
We're just correcting.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a good explanation.
That's the same explanation from GEO.
Okay, great. Thanks, Greg. Anybody have any questions?
Just that it equalizes these two positions between the two parties.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to vote on this one? All in favor? That's unanimous. Alana, you can deliver the good news to the clerk.
Thank you.
Thanks for sitting in. And then finally, we have this additional resolution, appropriation from contingent funds for RP 467, resolution number ID 11411. Can I get a motion on this one? Greg, seconded by Rich. Thank you. So I haven't even had a chance to look at this. Did this go through GO too?
This went through GO as well.
Okay, would you like to speak to it, Greg?
Yeah, so my understanding was that a change in New York State mandate required that there be an additional notice be sent out to the low-income senior exemptions to all residents, that they may be eligible. And this is just contracting the mailing of that additional mailing that's required.
So this is another unfunded mandate.
Sounds like it.
Yay, we love those. Okay, anybody have
Jay
any?
can give you a much longer explanation, but that,
No, that's okay.
That was the takeaway.
Okay, any questions for Greg? Ready to vote? All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you for filling us in on that, Greg. Okay, we also have this budget adjustment from Finance. That's informational only. Just want to call your attention to it. It was on your desk when you came in. And now we can talk about committee goals, which is, I'm sure, why you're all here. So we had a robust discussion at last month's meeting. It was not planned. It just kind of organically evolved. But we discussed a lot of issues of concern to all of us. And we tagged them for consideration as we formulated our goals for this year. I am sincerely hoping that there aren't any changes to this committee because I think we have an excellent diversity of opinions and backgrounds that contribute to a really productive committee. So I think it's safe for us to start talking about goals now.
Because we're all absolutely right? Just ask us.
No, I didn't say that. No, I think we all come at it from different perspectives, and none of us are shy about sharing our perspectives, and everything gets discussed pretty thoroughly, and that's helpful. Now, the things that we discussed last meeting included the fund balance policy, a better procedure for monitoring fund balance, revenue, and contingent spending, the sales tax agreement, which maybe should or maybe shouldn't be revisited. My personal favorite that's been carried over year after year because the pandemic's kind of interfered with our plans, and that's a better process for evaluating our direct reports, which we haven't really done for a couple of years. Let's see. One of the things that was mentioned was the need to kind of get a handle on what all of these elections changes are costing us. I don't know if that's really a goal or a policy consideration, but it's certainly something we can look into because we're trying to figure out ways that we can mitigate the high cost of staffing all these elections and the early voting. And then a final thing that came up, Rich mentioned the paucity of information we get in our budget books, which started me thinking about our budget process overall. And I had an opportunity to speak earlier today with Norma about that. She's on vacation. I promised her that while we might discuss a budget process review with her, we wouldn't make any decisions until she's back next month and can join us. So where would anybody like to start? Greg.
I just, maybe a quick refresh of our 2022 goals. I just sort of looked back from that first meeting, and I don't know if that would be helpful because it looks like we've accomplished a number of them, and really it only seems like maybe a few maybe leg over. I just didn't know if we wanted to look and see if we wanted to carry any of those over as well.
Well, that's not a bad plan, so why don't we start there?
Yeah, these are my notes, and just correct me if I'm wrong. We had recovery fund was an issue, which I think we've addressed. Update on retention efforts, which I think the compensation study being underway. Rollover policy, I think we squared away. Evaluation of staff space needs. Let's I had that as a BCP and F&I for some reason, but it seems like that's probably more of an F&I driven.
I think that's more of an F&I thing.
Evaluation process, comp study, which I think is retention efforts. And then I think this is something Rich, look at base budgeting, or what was your note again?
Yeah, this is my perennial saw, in that we examine changes to the budget, new spending, but once we put something in target, we don't really see it anymore, or not necessarily. And some of program-based evaluation, so base budget. Yeah.
And I think that, Deb, I think we use the election cost as an example, but I think when I brought that point up last month, it was around trying to understand what some of these major activities truly do cost us, and being able to be more conversant in that. And I think that maybe goes to Rich's point of, where are the everyday dollars and cents sort of going that we have in our budget. And maybe it's just creating a greater awareness of, or deeper dive at times, if possible.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly how that would look and where it would live, because, that overlaps into a lot of areas. Like when I was talking to Norma today, she was commenting on the fact that the quantity and quality of the OTRs that we had in the last budget cycle was substantially different from what we've seen historically, because historically what happens is, a department or an organization will ask the county administrator for money to be included in the budget. And if the county administrator doesn't include it in her budget, then the nature of the OTR is generally that someone or more of us will say, we want to include that in the budget. So it's already been vetted and considered in some respect. What we had this last budget cycle was just a plethora of these kind of off the wall, out of nowhere, I want to give money to this organization over here. And what that created after we passed the budget was a scramble in some of our program departments to try to figure out how they're going to fit that into what they were already planning on doing. I'd really like to consider that we look at our budget process and figure out a way to not leave our departments in that position. For example, if when we have our budget retreat, and this is something, I mentioned it to Lisa and I talked about it with Norma, and it's something we'll talk about next month. But when we have our budget retreat, what ordinarily happens is Lisa comes in and she tells us, these are the drivers. This is what maintenance of effort is going to cost us. These are the things that we might consider in excess of maintenance of effort. Give me a target for increasing the levy. And our contribution to that conversation is, here's the target that we want. What we might want to consider is giving admin and budget some input on initiatives we'd like to add beyond maintenance of effort, so that when Lisa and Norma start doing their budget planning, they can include some provision for that. And then we can dedicate some amount of money to that and accomplish what we want to accomplish, if we need to use an outside agency or a contractor, through the RFP process. This has a lot of benefits, for planning, for, comfort within our departments on planning for their work. And it also, as Drew and I discussed this morning, it also makes our process more legit, so it doesn't look like we've just decided to give money to some organization and we might find ourselves accused of gifting. So that's something that I think that we might want to consider, but I want to wait until Norma gets back, because she has promised me that while she's riding the car train back up here from Florida, she's going to be working up kind of her report on how she thought the budget process went last year, and I think that she's probably the best person for us to listen to on that subject. So Lee, you had your hand up.
Thanks. I think that what you just described may be a good addition to the process and a more timely one than what we did. I think it syncs a little bit with what Rich has suggested on a return to looking at the base budgets, because some of those proposals specific to departments, I think, came from a concern that we felt some of the bases weren't at a level where they may have need to be based on having been set decades ago, essentially, in a different time and a different place. And the other, to the other point, with concern toward the agencies, that might be a conversation going back toward the Human Services Coalition or some of those other umbrella pockets that we look at, because I wouldn't be surprised if we see a return to some discussion about food pantries and some of the needs that got put out there, or even the library
discussion. The Community
discussion.
Recovery Fund, yeah.
Yeah, there was a look toward that Community Recovery Fund that would have targeted a few of these, and it more broadly made me consider that's a tough one to do, because some of these same efforts are being replicated in other areas, and is there a way to look at a more broadly at some of those programs that certainly they had needs, but there's others that didn't step forward to apply. And
yeah, so that would allow us to take a more organized approach to a particular area, like food system planning, for example, rather than have this scattershot approach that comes from lots of OTRs. I'll get to you in a minute. But the other piece that you've touched on here is that if we decide to re-examine the budget process and suggest changes, and this includes your base budgeting question, Rich, it's going to involve program review by other committees. So, we have to be mindful that we're actually making recommendations that might require the program committees to do additional work in preparation for the budget. So I've got Rich and then Greg.
All that said, I think it would be a good committee goal to look at our budget process in 2023. And personally, I like your idea of forcing us to not procrastinate, but tip our hands early as at the beginning of the process rather than the end. But in 2023, that might not be possible by April when you would do your budget retreat. But even if we, the legislators, needed to do something by June, force us to think and speak, that would be an interesting thing. But it would mean that our work on this budget process would have to be beginning of year, not later.
Well, I mean, it's also individual. It's individual work in a sense. I mean, if you have, like you're fond of saying, you had another harebrained idea. If you had a harebrained idea, then it would be up to you to talk to your colleagues and see if you could muster up a consensus by a significant number of people who would support that. And then you could let
But what I heard you saying was, if we could do that earlier in the year, we wouldn't have the budget process in the fall be as chaotic, and I agree with that.
Well, because the budget process actually starts right after our retreat. So, when you come in with an OTR, and I don't mean you specifically, but when one of us comes in with an OTR in September, it's like we're messing up something that's already been in process for 4 months or 5 months.
Yeah, so I was just saying, I think this is a worthy area for us to work on in 2023.
Okay.
But early in 23.
And another piece is that I think this year it might not be that difficult for people to come up with ideas of things they might want to fund, simply because we've been through this community recovery fund process, and that's been a real eye-opener in terms of what the needs are in the community. And then it's up to us to decide which of those needs could we address that's a legitimate government function, and how do we want to address it? Okay, so I've got Lisa, and then I've lost track. Mike, yeah.
I just wanted to say, I think this is great timing because as we are transitioning to the new budget software, I think there's going to be enhanced capability for everyone, including legislators, department heads, and staff, to see further into the base budgets more readily and hopefully in a more user-friendly fashion, and be able to get dashboard information and so forth. So I think that's useful. A second unrelated point is not only would the advance direction be helpful in areas that are priorities for the legislature to add, but the reverse is also true. There may be years ahead, and 2024 might be one of them, where we need to cut, and those areas as well. And then the last point I wanted to make is I think that this also dovetails really nicely with our plans to move ahead with a strategic planning process in 2023. And from what I'm gathering from that work that we hope to soon start embarking on, is that the priority areas and the goals that are set by the legislature for the organization moving forward, the budget software that we have has a feature that will help us to track our progress and tie it to the budget around priorities. So I think all of this dovetails nicely together.
We have something called results-based accountability. Whatever happened to that?
We did, and that was, I think, a valiant effort to move us in that direction without any software that talked to each other. So we had a software for results-based accountability, a budget software, a finance software, an HR software. None of them integrated fully. Some talked to each other, some did not. So we've made attempts at this over the years, but I think this time we're looking at a package that will pull them all together.
I think we parked it with Partners for Quality, didn't we, Lisa?
I remember that, PFQ. Yeah.
History.
Mike? Did you have?
Barbara Mink's process.
Oh, now
that goes back
I just
ways.
dated myself on that one.
That's right. Because I think there's a mug out there that has that title on it in the kitchen. I'd really like to see us try to figure out a better way of choosing to add staff. We had an awful lot of new positions last time. And I think it was because, as you say, Deborah, people said, I'd like to do this, let's hire somebody. Whether it's a sustainability planner, or whether it's somebody in administration, somebody, grants writers, all those things. All things that are good ideas, but when you put them all together, they cost a lot of money. I'd like to see something short of a hiring freeze, but a little higher than just, this department is asking for it. How do we come to a decision about it? Because I know, Deborah, you had some problems with that in your vote on the budget, and I don't blame you. But I would have some problems if we saw a repeat of last year, this year. I think we've got to pay more attention to the recommendations of our county administrator, who is our budget officer. And not just start with what is being given to us by the administrator as a roadmap, but rather as this is what is going to be the budget if we don't adopt a budget. And if we make changes to it, we really got to persuade everybody that this is something that we need to do, which is fiscally responsible and is good for the people of Tompkins County. So I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but I really think that's an area we've got to talk about more and move forward on. And then when we get done with this discussion, I got one more thing I want to mention.
Okay. Well, I think that the staffing issue would be subsumed in this discussion of a better budget process. I mean, we were just really out of flipping control last year. And, I guess I should have cracked the whip harder on you people, but yeah, I'm just one of 14. And I hope that after our irrationally exuberant budget process of last year, we will be more disciplined going forward. Greg?
Just to clarify, though, and maybe I'm mistaken, but a majority of the FTE requests, additional FTE requests, came in the county administrator's budget and were not added in the OTR process.
Well, the majority, yes.
There are more FTEs in the budget presented to us than were added through the OTR process.
Yes,
Yeah.
but remember, too, I think that we were in the position of having to make adjustments on account of the staffing cuts that we made in 2020 in order to get ourselves through the pandemic without having to involuntarily lay anyone off. If you want to address that, Lisa.
That's true. I can also say there were some of those OTRs that were paid for with, or the FTEs that were paid for with local funding, but the majority of them were funded already through state, federal, or other sources.
Yeah, not a critique.
Yeah.
I maybe slightly countering the balance to your comment of we were out of control in the process.
Well, it wasn't just the addition of staff. It was all the other little special things we added that didn't come out of requests that Lisa had denied. I mean, admittedly, my experience here is limited to 5 years, but in the 4 years preceding last year, I never saw the kind of OTRs that came up last year and were kind of routinely approved by a majority of my colleagues.
So I have two things. There were a few of us that did recommend reductions in certain areas through the OTR process, which did not fall favorably. I'm looking at the colleague to my right and myself and a few others. But I like this idea of budget review. I think this is a really healthy discussion. I also think Debbie mentioned something about like program reviews or sort of department program, things like that. I think that'd be something too that we should look at sort of a multi-year approach so that it's not overwhelming, but sort of plan and create a plan to sort of review on somewhat regularity and have sort of a multi-year approach to looking at some of these programs and saying, okay, we looked at it 3 years ago, let's take another look and see where we're at, to look at some of the base budgeting questions and concerns and doing that early. And I think, again, that leads back into what are things really costing us? And if we continue to sort of ask ourselves these questions, and are we providing the service or getting the result that we need based on the investment that we're making? And that's where we would look to, I think, other committees within the legislature to help validate those questions. But really, because we have 14 of us that vote on the budget, it's 14 of us, soon to be 16 at some point, that are all going to play a role. So I think it's okay if other committees look to make recommendations to BCP.
It's not only okay. I
it's
think
required.
It's necessary because the program committees are in the best position
to make that recommendation,
to assess the ROI on our investments in various departments. I will say, though, in terms of your long-range planning proposal, that's where I think the strategic plan that Lisa is championing will be useful. So Okay, so we got budget review, and it's budget process review, and it's certainly going to include your concern about staffing. Now, you said you had another issue.
Yeah, somewhere in our goals here.
Okay, so let's get to the next one, which is the fund balance policy. There seemed to be an appetite for revisiting that issue, and I'm okay with that. If the rest of you are, Lee, you keep gesturing, so are you trying to raise your hand?
Well, I was one of the ones on that and sales tax, and I'm not saying that I want to see us delve into recrafting those, but I think there's probably, among some of the newer members, probably not a good, strong understanding of how those came to be, and it may be that they're completely rational and the numbers are good, and I think it's an educational thing as much as anything.
Is this the fund balance policy or the sales tax policy?
Both fund balance and sales tax, because I think there's some impressions out there that maybe there's too much of one or not a fair distribution of the other, and I think if we just spend some time understanding those original agreements and policies, it may alleviate some of those comments and concerns that they're not. That they're in need of review, and maybe they're not.
Well, I guess that how we could phrase this goal then is that we would just review them. And I think implicit in that would be that if we felt that recommendations for change were in order, we could make them. Does that? Okay, everybody's on board.
Talking about fund balance or fund balance and sales tax formula?
Well, I'm talking about, yeah, the fund balance, so review 2 policies, and that would be the fund balance policy, which is only a year or 2 old, so it's well in need of review, and the sales tax agreement.
Not to add to your workload, but I know I've been discussing with Norma, and we have already been looking at the fiscal policy, which this committee reviewed in brief in 2022 with the change in the rollover policy, and said we'd go back and take a more thorough look at the fiscal policy. But I think given some of the changes that are coming with the new database, and we're in admin and finance stepping back and looking at our overall procedures and where that fits in with the fiscal policy. So once we're done reviewing that, I think we'll probably be bringing that back to this committee for another look.
So that review would be primarily procedural or substantive?
Probably a little of both.
All right, well, I changed it from 2 policies to 3.
I think staff will do at least the heavy lift of the draft and bring it to you guys for.
Well, and I think that to some extent, you all are going to have to do some heavy lifting in guiding us on the sales tax agreement, which I fear will be somewhat touchy politically. So we will have to be very tactful.
Yeah, I mean, this is a be careful what you wish for thing to put on our goals, but at the least, I think we could get educated on the sales tax formula, some history on it, and what some of the boxes actually are doing. And then the mechanics of, if we were to suggest changes, who has the authority to change it? Is this something that is county-driven, or do you need to attain consensus with the towns, villages, and the city?
There are certain parts of it that both the city and the county need to agree to reopen it. So if both parties aren't willing, then there is no changing to it. But I think
Learning about that, I think, would be a goal, if not going further than that.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Rich, because in 5 years on the legislature, I didn't even try to decipher that chart until last year. it's.
I think Randy mentioned it early on in the year, saying, well, this doesn't seem right. And the idea of jumping in to change one piece of this without a comprehensive approach would probably explode.
Well, I will say that my understanding of the power dynamics at the time that the current sales tax agreement was inked is that the city was the 800-pound gorilla in Tompkins County, and we really didn't seem to have a heck of a lot of bargaining power. So I don't know to what extent we're really going to be able to make any meaningful changes, but it will at least be an educational process for the five of us. Mike?
The bargaining power the county had that back then was whether or not to ask for the extra 1%. And the city wanted the extra money as well, and that was the opportunity the county had to negotiate, because if the county just said, we want the 1%, the city had the right to, words out of my mind, preempt, yes, preempt its share and not share any of the money. So I wasn't here when that was negotiated, but basically the towns and villages did not share much on that 1%.
Well, the story that I heard was that a former county employee who was intimately familiar with that process called that extortion and not negotiation. But who am I to say?
Well, I don't want to go there, but I think educating, as Rick said, on this is a good thing to do, so that people can understand it. Whether I'm not sure we want to make a change, but we'll have to see.
Greg?
No, not on this topic.
Lee?
I'll echo Mike, because what made me bring that up in response to one of the new members was I can remember one of my predecessors who shared the last name went in that direction in the early 90s, and Stu Stein set him down and gave him a discussion about some of the things the city pays for that themselves versus what the county pays for out in the towns, and bridges had a lot to do with it. And basically, my predecessor backed away and said, this is probably a very fair agreement in the end, and could cause some changes that we don't need to make. So, and I think it goes to, let's get a little education on it, because it may help to dispel some perceptions that things aren't fair.
Well, this will all be part of our review. Okay. All right. So we've got that.
Can I just throw the caution in, just every time we're thinking about sales tax and casino money? It was only 2 years ago when we lost the greatest percentage of sales tax of any county in the state outside of New York City. Yeah, we came back, but it's volatile, and we have to be careful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think relying on sales tax to keep sailing upward is a little over-optimistic. I was reading an article today that Vanguard, which manages over $7 trillion in pension and retirement funds, is seeing a serious uptick in borrowing from pension funds and 401ks because the cushion that the pandemic aid provided to private taxpayers, those $600 and $800 payments that we got. I mean, they gave people a cushion, but the way Vanguard described it is in the face of the current inflationary tendencies, that cushion's getting a bit threadbare. So, if people's spending power is being affected to the point where they're having to borrow from their retirement funds, I don't think we can necessarily count on seeing robust sales tax performance forever. but as Greg has observed, I tend to see the glasses three-quarters empty when it comes to the economy.
There's a glass step?
There's a glass.
There's a glass, okay, good.
Anyway,
The puddle's getting bigger.
yeah, there's a hole in the bottom of that glass. All right, so, Mike, you said you had something on another topic. What was that?
Oh, it's just something I've been thinking about, and that is our employees and morale. We've had some symptoms, and certainly we've seen it in other municipalities close by recently, of employees being unhappy, feeling underpaid, I suspect, undervalued, and things like that. And it's not an easy thing to measure, not an easy thing to attack, but we've had a few symptoms in different departments of our own county of feelings coming back from employees. And I just think we ought to be real careful there, and we ought to be thinking about what we can do to foster morale. Certainly this compensation study is an effort in that direction. We do, out of Ruby's department, I know they do employee rewards. We do things that we didn't used to do, like our picnics and things like that. But with inflation going the way it's going, we need to keep on top of that issue.
Okay, well, what would that look like? I mean, what would we need? That would certainly involve Ruby and her department. I don't want to add to but
It would depend on what we needed to add. In addition to the compensation study, that's going to cost money. We do the 25-year club, we do milestone recognitions. If we're going to do anything else, it's going to require funds.
we have a killer employee picnic every year.
And, you know, we're trying in our policies to encourage departments to do recognitions, but then they're limited if funding is required. Purchasing of things, there are rules to abide by. So it depends on what kind of things we're talking about adding.
I think
Kleenex.
I think staff shortages, if you don't have enough people sharing the burden in your department, whatever it is, I think that's a real morale crippler.
It is, but then again, that goes back to coming up with some sort of system or process to evaluate how we add positions. It's all going to come down to whether we can invest monetarily to it. Now, we can do, you know, I think each department is doing something to increase morale within their departments, anything that's within their power to do.
But it doesn't cost money.
That doesn't cost money, or the department head is fronting the cost, you know, but still, we need to come up with something. Morale is so difficult to measure, and there's so many factors that to be considered. Money is one way. Adherence to policies in a consistent manner is another way. So I think we need to make sure we are all abiding by the policies and that the policies are fair. So that doesn't cost money. That just requires us to review and to adhere to. Right, Drew? And educate.
Yeah, I don't know if that's, I mean, I don't know how this committee would turn that into a goal beyond the fact that whenever we're presented with an option to make our staff more comfortable, feel more valued, make their lives better in any way, we certainly want to consider that.
I think listening makes a lot of difference. I know, and Lisa carried on some of this, but previous two administrators always had their coffee with certain people at the different departments, have them come in, and opportunity for them to express themselves in a different way than maybe through the department head, for example, and just say, hey, let's talk about how things are going. And I think those kind of things are very helpful.
And we do have lattes with Lisa. That's been scheduled. And another thing I think that helps is we have access to that countywide training fund that we've really been pushing and trying to get employees to take advantage of.
The climate survey, the time for an update on where we are. That was 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a little longer, Lisa, kind of like PFQ, but we spent a lot of time and initiative and department involvement in crafting that and a roadmap that came ahead before the pandemic. Maybe that it's as simple as returning to that and seeing where we are.
That's on the radar and something that we were planning to institute in 2023. We are waiting to, it's now, we want to get the Chief Equity Diversity Officer on board and also undertake the strategic planning process and then do another climate survey for sure. It's very helpful. And a lot of the follow-up from that has led to really good things from the last survey.
So that's a 2024 plan in all reality?
In reality, I think so.
And Mike, I think to your point, I think it's a good one. And I think to everybody, to the conversation, morale is hard to measure because it means different things in different departments. It's so nuanced and specific, and what's important to the highway department and the maintenance and facilities crew and whomever, the folks up at the corrections. I mean, it's all so unique. But I do think it comes with like sort of a staff focus, and I do think we've done
I don't think we can mandate.
A fairly good job over this last year, keeping staff top of mind and trying to create those opportunities. But I guess Ruby, I would look to you to say, are there other opportunities where legislators can get involved, can do things outside of the committee, can step up or be a part of, or and I'm sure the answer is yes, but just knowing what those are, when those are, where those are, and how we can help, and if it would help. If you say, no, stay away, it probably wouldn't help. That's good advice too.
I would not dare tell you to stay away.
But to Mike's point about listening, if there's a way that we can, get out and help that process in some way, maybe that's a way that we can do some committee work outside of the committee.
And for that, I think, you need there may be a department head who would like a legislator to come and sit in on a staff meeting or to take part in some of their activities. But be careful what you ask for.
Sure. No, and I realize that, but there's 14 of us, and hopefully the invitation would strike an interest of somebody, or a couple people at least.
I must say, it was wonderful to see the level of participation at the county employee picnic of the legislators. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So any kind of participation in those events, I think, we'll poll the department heads.
So maybe you and Lisa could maybe work on how we can become maybe more engaged, or opportunities for engagement with staff.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to, by fiat, suggest that this next year will be the year that we finally address the direct report evaluations. And we will work closely with Ruby on that.
Madam Chair, if I may, if we could remember we talked about having at least 1 to 2 legislators work directly with me in order to present something to the committee. So if we could designate someone when you're ready, not right now, but just to go over.
We'll know who's on the committee next week, I guess, because Sean will be making those announcements. I will be happy to work with you on that one, because we just keep getting derailed on this. Now, granted, we've had a lot of turnover in our direct report population. But now I think everybody's been around long enough that we can, except for you, but we'll get there. Yeah. So if, when you find out if you're continuing on the committee, if you are interested in participating on this, just let me and Ruby know. Rich?
If I continue on the committee, I would be willing to serve.
Okay. All right. So, next month, Norma will be here to participate as we get this budget process review thing off the ground. Okay, a couple things are left from last month's discussion. There was a request that we get better monitoring of fund balance revenue and contingent spending throughout the year, and there were comments that indicated that the new software would make that easier to do. I do not think this is necessarily a goal per se, but if we're going to ask staff to get us this information, say on a quarterly basis, then I think we need to be agreed that that's what we're asking for, and we need to give staff a heads up that that's what we're asking for. I'm not sure, you know, and Drew, you can weigh in on this, but everything I've heard from both Rick and you about the fluctuations in these numbers suggests to me that a monthly report might not be easy to put together or particularly helpful. What do you think?
I would definitely agree with that. And, you know, I think folks on this committee have been around long enough to realize that a lot of the funding that the county receives is often anywhere from 2 to 6 months delayed. So that's why at the year end, we spend at least 3 months before we even start issuing deadlines to departments on expenditures and revenues. So hopefully that brings us to March, April. So hopefully by June, we can compile all those together and have a rough draft of where that is. So at any given time, we could easily be 3 to 6 months lag in that. I think as we went into the pandemic, we did a really good job of working with departments to say, hey, let's get a forecast and say, where are you going to be this year? And I think that was the first time in my tenure here, and probably in quite a few years, that we asked department heads to really say, okay, you told us you were going to get $1 million in state funding. Where are you at with that? Where do you think you'll end up? You know, because we probably have at least, I mean, scores, maybe even over 100 different funding streams that we're getting state and federal. So there's sometimes a lag on those. So, you know, as far as the actual cash balance, as you alluded to, we fluctuate upwards of $30 to $40 million throughout the year that our cash balance raises in that March to April timeframe and dives down by December, January. So it's a big, you've got two things moving. You've got a cash balance and you've got, you know, the whole forecasting and revenues, and where do we want to put county administration and departments in on that mix as well as finance. So.
I hear that 100%. And I don't necessarily know if a number of us are asking for like financial statement review, right? Because a lot of what you're talking about are, you know, sort of operating accounts, right? Where you're getting funds in and you have expenditures. And September 20th, 22, the finance report, we got this 2022 contingent account breakdown. For me personally, I would be sufficed with that of, you know, every quarter, what has been approved, because if it doesn't come out of the contingent account unless it's been approved by the legislature. So what's been approved to date out of the account, we load that account at some point,
And reload.
But we load at the beginning, or whenever we load with a dollar amount, or there's a budgeted amount, let's just call it budgeted, of, 900,000 last year, and then all of these things. And so I've tried to keep track every time we approve one at the legislature meeting, I write down that we approved it out of contingent fund, because nobody could seem to get an updated list of what was there. So I'm just looking for, this was the resolution number, what it said, and the amount. And I think that would suffice many for where we are to date on contingent fund, and really have nothing to do with our irregular cash flow cycles that we run into. How we do that with the fund balance is maybe more nuanced and have some other questions, that need to be asked. But, again, I don't think we need to overthink this. I don't think it's a financial statement. It does, it doesn't have to be audited. It just has to be, here's what we've spent to date based on what we've planned to spend, or based on, contingent fund, based on what we've budgeted, here's what's left. Just so we can kind of get a running track of where we are, or what we've done, to this point.
So quarterly reports, say at our August, July, and would that be, at the end of every quarter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it'd be like March.
April, I can.
Or so it'd be like, April. Yeah.
And I will say, too, that I've asked Norma, she put out those really helpful sheets as we went through the community recovery and budget processes that showed what the status of what we had spent out of fund balance at the time. I've asked her if she could kind of update that for our next meeting.
Again, I think it's something, hopefully it's simple, because, I'm assuming every time one of these resolutions out of contingent fund is approved, it comes across somebody in the finance department's desk, because the action has to be taken on it. So a running list would be great. I don't know if my colleagues would agree, but that's my personal opinion.
That's a very easy request. I like those.
What?
I was kidding. I was going to say I totally disagree, but no, that makes perfect sense.
Okay.
And recognizing that it's not going to be.
These are just going to be ballpark.
Perfect. Yeah,
Ballpark's great.
It's milestones. It's a roadmap for us, not a something to send to the auditor.
Okay, so that's quarterly. And then I guess the last thing that we discussed last month was trying to get a handle on what we're spending on elections. Is that a separate thing that you really want to look into, or was this just part of the base budgeting?
I think I raised that because I was asking whether this is something from a personnel standpoint we could use cross-trained personnel to step in for the elections. So we didn't have to hire a whole slew of outside people, but there were logistic issues with that, and I think Ruby made a face when I suggested it. So I don't know that that's a goal.
Ruby's poker face is about as good as mine, I must say.
So I don't know that that's an appropriate goal. I think it was more of a question whether that was a viable avenue, and it sounds like it wasn't.
Okay,
Fair
well,
enough.
so we can just cross that off the list then. Okay, so that's everything from last month. Is there anything else that I've missed?
If we could solve fund balance, the budget process, sales tax formula, and how we review our reports, yeah, we'd
We'd have a good year, wouldn't we?
would have a good year.
All right.
Have any doubts?
We're going to get there.
All right. I've got nothing else. If there's nothing anybody else has, I think we can stand adjourned. Thank you all for an excellent year. It's been a real pleasure working with all of you. So,
Thanks for leading us.
my pleasure. Okay. I hope I'll see you all next month.
Recording stopped. can finally push a McCarthy picture.